Thank you very much. Thank you all. So please don't tell the other countries, but I quite like giving talks in Switzerland. And that's because I'm a science fiction writer, and science fiction was invented in Switzerland 210 years ago in the other Switzerland near Lake Geneva. And that was when an Englishwoman named Mary Shelley found herself on vacation and wrote a novel called Frankenstein, the very first science fiction novel. Now, what you may not know is that Shelley wrote that book because she was having a terrible time in Switzerland. And it was such an awful time that she and her friends decided to have a writing competition to distract themselves from Switzerland. Now, this was not Switzerland's fault, because 1816 was the year they called the year without a summer. It was the year that a volcanic eruption in Indonesia blacked out the sky, causing mass crop failures and a huge refugee crisis, with people crisscrossing the world looking for a way to not starve to death. So Shelley was not the only person having a bad time in Switzerland that summer. Everyone was having a bad time everywhere that year. Now, 210 years later, I think we can all relate to having a bad year everywhere. But unlike the summer, unlike that year without a summer, the problems we're having this year, they are not natural phenomena. They are decidedly human in origin. So today, I want to tell you some other Swiss stories about how Switzerland played a rather unfortunate role in getting us to this moment where we're having a bad time, and how Switzerland is the place where everything started to change, and quite possibly for the better. It's a story I've been living for most of my adult life. For the past 25 years, I've been an activist with an organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It's the world's oldest digital rights group, and I was their first European director. Now, being a digital rights activist, it's a very strange job, because tech policy issues are very technical, they're very abstract, and the issues we're trying to get people to think about right now relate to consequences that they will face many, many years in the future, and for perfectly good reasons. Most people want to focus on concrete things that are happening right now, not on abstract things that might happen in 20 years. So the job here is about finding ways to raise the salience of these issues before they are concrete and immediate, because by the time these issues are concrete and immediate, it's going to be too late to do anything about them. So for the past quarter of a century, I've come up with metaphors, framing devices, parables, and because I'm a science fiction writer, many narratives. But it turned out that the secret to getting people to pay attention to these abstract digital issues was swearing. Back in 2022, I coined a dirty little word to talk about the way our technology is going wrong. This word is Enshittification, and the word caught on. Every year since, it's been someone's word of the year. It was the American Dialect Society's word of the year. It was Australia's Macquarie Dictionary word of the year. It was Webster's word of the year. It was the New Scientist's word of the year. And the book I published on this subject last year was an immediate international bestseller and went through 10 printings in 11 weeks. So I've made my peace with the fact that this is my legacy, and I will have a poop emoji on my headstone. And so I would be remiss if I didn't start this talk by unpacking this idea of enshittification a little for you. Now, if you've encountered this idea at all in the wild, you've probably heard about this three-stage process of platform decay that I've described. In stage one, a platform is good to its end users, but it's finding a way to lock those users in. So think about Facebook. In 2006, Mark Zuckerberg decided to open Facebook to the general public. You no longer needed the .edu email address that you could only get at an American four-year college. Anyone could join Facebook. But Mark Zuckerberg had a problem in that moment, which is that everyone who wanted a social media account already had a social media account on another service called MySpace. So Zuck made quite a nice pitch to those MySpace users. Come to Facebook, he said, and tell me who matters to you and what you want to hear about. And anytime those people post things for public consumption, I'll show it to you. You'll see the things that you want to see, none of the things you haven't asked to see. And best of all, I will never, ever spy on you. Not like MySpace. MySpace is owned by an evil, crapulent, senescent Australian vampire billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, who spies on you with every hour that God sends. And so come to Facebook, because no one should use social media owned by a billionaire who wants to spy on you. Now, you got to hand it to him. That was a very good offer, and many of us flocked to Facebook, and that was stage one, or the first half of stage one of enshittification, which is being good to end users. But in so doing, we delivered the second half of phase one of enshittification, which is locking users in. There are a lot of ways platforms can lock you in. Amazon does it by selling you Prime, so you've already paid for a year's shipping in advance and you'd be a fool to shop anywhere else. Uber had a very abstruse way of locking people in. They asked the Saudi royal family for $31 billion, and then they lost 41 cents on every dollar they made for 13 years, driving every other taxi company out of business, inducing a lost decade for transit investment because taxis were too cheap to meter, and then once there was no competition, they were able to double the price. And Google just pays Apple $20 billion a year not to enter the search market, so there's nowhere else to go. But Facebook and other social media, they play lock-in on the easiest setting imaginable because users lock themselves to social media thanks to something economists call the collective action problem. This is how economists describe the fact that no matter how much you love your friends, they are still a gigantic pain in the ass. And even though you all hate Facebook, you are not going to agree on where you're going to go next or what time it's time to leave. And because you love your friends, leaving Facebook is costly. Economists call this the switching costs. It means all the things that you have to leave if you leave the platform. So long as you love your friends more than you hate Mark Zuckerberg can torture you and you will stick around. So that's stage one of enshittification. Be good to end users, but lock those users in. And that means that it's time to move on to stage two of enshittification, which is making things worse for end users in order to make things better for businesses. So back to Facebook. Once Mark Zuckerberg had us all locked in, he knew that he could make things worse and we would stick around because we loved our pain in the ass friends more than we hated him. Or to put it in the terms that an economist would use, the collective action problem imposed by an unacceptable switching cost on us, which exceeded the surplus that Mark Zuckerberg extracted from those users. Zuck wanted to make life better for another group of platform participants. He wanted to make life better for businesses. So to the advertisers, Mark Zuckerberg said, hey, do you remember we told these suckers that we weren't going to spy on them? Now, obviously, that was a lie. We spy on them with from asshole to appetite. Give us a remarkably small amount of money, and we will target ads to them with exquisite fidelity. And because we are such proud craftspeople, we will pay for a whole building full of anti-fraud engineers who are going to make sure that if you give us a franc to show an ad to a user, we will find that user and shove that ad right in their face. So advertisers piled in, and they became locked in too. They became dependent on Facebook, or rather they became dependent on us, the Facebook users. We held each other hostage, and then the advertisers were hostage to us. And that means that Facebook was ready to enter stage three of enshittification, which is making things worse for business customers too. So ad prices soared. Ad targeting fidelity went through the floor. Ad fraud exploded. In 2017, Procter & Gamble had a suspicion that maybe their surveillance ads, they call them behavioral ads, that maybe their surveillance ads weren't performing as well as they used to. So they took their annual budget for surveillance advertising from $200 million a year to zero, and they saw a 0% drop in sales. Because to a first approximation, no one saw those ads. So everything disappeared down the fraud hole. Everyone was getting a bad deal. The quantum of material that you asked to see that showed up in your Facebook feed had dwindled to a kind of homeopathic residue. And what was left behind was a vacuum that could be filled with things that people would pay to show you by advertisers and publishers who were also getting screwed by the platform. Facebook didn't screw users to benefit advertisers. Facebook screwed users, it screwed advertisers, and it screwed publishers. Just like Amazon screws not just the people who buy things there, but the people who sell things there, taking 50 to 60% out of every dollar that is spent on the platform. Just like Apple and Google screw every publisher on iOS and Android, taking 30 cents out of every dollar collected through their platforms. So that is enshittification as seen from the outside. Stage one, be good to users, find a way to lock users in. Stage two, screw the users to make things better for business customers, find a way to lock them in. Stage three, screw the business customers, take all the value for yourself, everyone loses, except for the corporate executives and their investors. But even those corporate executives, even those investors, they're not happy because they know that an equilibrium in which all value is transferred away from users and businesses to the investors and the executives is very brittle. The difference between, God, I hate Facebook, but I keep coming back to it, and God, I hate Facebook, and I'm never coming back to it, is razor thin. You get one Cambridge Analytica scandal, one whistleblower complaint, a single live stream mass shooting, and people bolt for the exits. And when that happens, the stock market stages a mass sell-off of stock. And so the company panics. And being technologists, they have a technical term for panicking. They call it pivoting. And so this is how one day Mark Zuckerberg arose from his sarcophagus and said, "Hearken to me, brothers and sisters, for I've had a vision. I know that I told you that your future would consist of arguing with your most racist uncle, using this primitive text interface I created in my dorm room to non-consensually rate how bangable Harvard undergraduates were. But it turns out that the true future is for me to transform you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low-polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character so that I can imprison you in a virtual world I stole from a 25-year-old satirical dystopian science fiction novel that I call the metaverse." And that is the final stage of enshittification, when the platform turns into a giant pile of shit. And that is the thesis of enshittification. And while it has a lot of explanatory power, it does raise some important questions, like, why do we keep using these platforms if they're so terrible? Now, economists have an answer. The neoclassicals, the ordo-liberals, they like an idea they call revealed preferences. The idea is that if you say you don't like something, but you do it anyway, you must secretly like it. You have revealed your preference for it. Now, this is the kind of belief that you can only take seriously if you have incurred the very specific kind of neurological injury that arises when you do an economics degree. It's a neurological injury that makes you incapable of perceiving or reasoning about power. If you believe in revealed preferences and you meet someone who sold their kidney to pay the rent, you then conclude, well, they have a revealed preference for only having one kidney. To reveal people's true preferences, you need to give them the freedom to express those preferences, which is what Apple did in 2021. They updated iOS, that's the operating system for their mobile devices, and if you click just one checkbox in the user interface, you could opt out of all of Facebook's spying. 96% of iOS users clicked that box. I assume the other 4% were either Facebook employees or drunk Facebook employees, which makes a lot of sense because if I worked at Facebook, I would be drunk all the time. But at the same time as Apple was rolling out this update, they launched their own secret surveillance in iOS that users were not told about or given a chance to opt out of, that collected the same data that Facebook was collecting for the same purpose, to target ads to iOS users. And when Apple was caught doing this in 2022, they lied about it, and then they were banged to rights, and then that was it. They just kept it going. No one has released another update to iOS that lets you block Apple's spying, though the 96% of iOS users who blocked Facebook spying certainly revealed a strong preference for not being spied on. So why hasn't this update been released? Why wouldn't someone release the app? Apple customers value their privacy. They're the richest technology users in the world. Someone could make a lot of money selling them the app that stopped Apple from spying on them. The iPhone is capable of running that program because the iPhone is capable of running every program because the iPhone is a computer. And we only know how to make one kind of computer, a computer with a sort of Germanic name. It's the Turing-complete Universal von Neumann machine. And that's what computer scientists call an engine that is capable of computing every valid program, which means that every computer can run every program, from your car's infotainment system to the little chip in your pacemaker. And that means that if Tim Cook tells one of his employees in Cupertino to install a 10-foot pile of shit in your iPhone, then a smart grad student down the road at ETH Zurich can make a 4-meter ladder out of code that goes straight over that pile of shit and costlessly, instantaneously distribute that code to everyone in the world. So why haven't they? Are ETH grad students allergic to money? Do they love surveillance? Are they incapable of imagining a privacy blocker for iOS that works on Apple as well as Facebook? No, the reason they didn't make that program is that that program would be illegal. And the reason that program is illegal is because of something that happened in Switzerland. Something very bad and very important happened to our technology in Geneva in 1996. That was the year that WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is a UN specialized agency that makes the world's IP treaties, they finalized 2 treaties. The WIPO Performer and Phonograms Treaty and the WIPO Copyright Treaty. Everyone just calls them the Internet Treaties. And under these treaties, countries are obliged to pass something called an anti-circumvention law. Now, that is a law that makes it illegal to modify or alter any digital program or device that is designed not to be modified and not to be altered. That means that when the programmer designs the software, they put a kind of virtual dotted line around some of the code. And they put a label on it that says, don't change this, and that becomes a crime to change, even if you're doing something that is otherwise legal. Think of inkjet printers here if you want to understand how this works. There is a cartel of 4 companies that control the world's inkjet market, and they use software that locks out generic ink, and it's a crime to remove or alter that software. So even though no parliament, no Congress, no devolved cantonal authority ever made a law that said if you buy your printer from HP, you have to buy your ink from HP, it is against the law to change your printer so that you can use someone else's ink. And the cartel, they use these software locks and these internet treaties to make it a crime to compete with them. They call it felony contempt of business model. And this lets them monotonically raise and raise and raise and raise the price of ink until today, printer ink is the most expensive fluid a civilian can purchase without a government permit. At $10,000 a gallon, it would be cheaper to print your children's homework with the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion. And this is why there is no ETH grad student who's just bought a house with the money they made from selling an app that stops Apple from spying on its customers. Now, it's not Switzerland's fault that Mary Shelley had a terrible vacation on Lake Geneva. Her trip was ruined by something that happened in another country. Nor was it Switzerland's fault that WIPO made these terrible treaties. The world's internet was ruined by something that happened in America. Where else? Bill Clinton, he had a project to demilitarize the internet. And Clinton put his vice president, Al Gore, in charge of this project. Gore launched something called the National Information Infrastructure Initiative, or everyone called it the Information Superhighway Initiative. And for a couple of years there, anyone who had an ambitious idea for what to do with this new internet made a pilgrimage to Al Gore to pitch it to him. And that included one of Clinton's top officials, his IP czar, a lawyer named Bruce Lehman. Now, Lehman proposed an anti-circumvention law to Gore, a law that makes it illegal to modify a device that you own if the manufacturer doesn't want you to, a felony contempt of business model law. And to Gore's undying credit, he rejected this idea. He laughed Lehman out of the room. Well, Lehman left the room and he kept going to Geneva, where he got WIPO to turn anti-circumvention into a legal obligation for every treaty signatory. Then Lehman went back to Washington, and in 1998, he got Congress to pass the law that Al Gore said the internet shouldn't have, and it became Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and it made it a felony to modify a device without permission with a first offense sentence of a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine. And now, 30 years later, virtually every country in the world has a version of this law, because the US Trade Representative made anti-circumvention a top trade priority for US trading partners. It required that every country that traded with America would have to make it illegal for its own entrepreneurs, its own firms, its own technologists to go into business disenshittifying the defective products that America was exporting around the world. And that means that when a company enshittifies its digital products to steal your money, to steal your data, to lock you in, to manipulate you, to abuse you, it is a crime for any other company anywhere in the world to make a product that repairs those defects, which is how we get enshittification. Companies know they have you locked in, and that if they make their products worse, they don't have to worry about new market entrants who will fix their broken products, who will win your loyalty. They know that you are defenseless, and so they enshittify the products and the services that you rely on. They enshittify their products for the same reason your dog licks its balls, because they can. And that brings me again back to Switzerland, but not Geneva. I'm not going to talk about things that happened in the 1810s or even the 1990s. I'm going to talk about something that happened very close to here and pretty recently, 11 weeks ago and 150 kilometers away. And I'm not going to talk about American politicians. I'm going to talk about a Canadian because, like all the best Americans, I am a Canadian. So 11 weeks ago, 150 kilometers away, our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, stood up in Davos and announced that the world had suffered a rupture, a breaking point in the post-war settlement. Now, obviously, the post-war settlement, that is a big, complex project. But for the past 30 years, the substrate that the post-war settlement runs on has been replaced by digital technology. The internet is the platform of geopolitics. So when there's a rupture in the post-war settlement, that means that there's a rupture in tech policy, and that means everything is up for grabs. Now, remember when I said the US trade representative bullied all of America's trading partners into passing their own anti-circumvention laws that criminalized modifying technology products? The threat that America used to force that legal change on its trading partners, that threat was tariffs. If you don't pass an anti-circumvention law, you will not be able to export your products to America. And if you do pass an anti-circumvention law, well, then you can freely export your products to 300 million affluent American consumers. So, happy Liberation Day. Trump smashed the post-war settlement. It started on April 1st last year when he announced illegal, irrational, destructive tariffs on exports from every country in the world. And like Carney said, this is an opportunity to change how we do things, to think different about tech. And that means that activists like me, activists who've been trying to budge this issue for a quarter of a century, we have new allies. People who don't live in the USA, who want to make America's tech trillions into their own tech billions. Because it's not just selling apps, it's selling app stores. Apple takes a 30% commission out of every dollar collected through its app store. That is a payment processing business whose margins make printer ink look unambitious. It nets $100 billion a year for the company. If you go into business selling people the tools they need to market their own app stores that let you sell an app that blocks Apple from spying on you, you could offer a 90% discount on payment processing and net $10 billion a year. As Jeff Bezos famously said to the publishers when he started Amazon, your margin is my opportunity. Sell these tools and everyone in the world will beat a path to your door, because everyone suffers under America's defective, enshittified tech exports, including Americans, because Apple is extremely selective about who they're going to protect their customers from. Sure, they will block Facebook spying, but not their own spying. And last October, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, intervened to block an app called IceBlock. IceBlock was an app that warned Apple customers if there was a masked, armed ICE thug nearby who wanted to shoot them in the face or kidnap them to an onshore black site torture camp or send them to a Salvadoran slave labor camp for the rest of their lives. That's the kind of thing that Apple customers might want to know about. Americans would line up to buy tools to help them escape from American tech companies. And it's not just entrepreneurs or digital rights hippies like me who have a stake in this. Now that America's tech platforms have fused with his state, American tech products now constitute a substantial geopolitical risk. When a high court judge in Brazil sentenced Trump ally Jair Bolsonaro to prison for corruption, Microsoft and Trump retaliated by killing that judge's personal and work M365 accounts. He lost his working documents, his calendar, his email archives, his address book, even the ability to reset his password on non-Microsoft platforms, because all of that reset email went to his Outlook address. And then when the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court swore out an arrest warrant for the genocidaire Benjamin Netanyahu, Microsoft and Trump took away his accounts too. Documents, email archives, calendar, contacts, and email address. Now, this is the kind of structural risk we were warned we would face if we allowed Huawei to provide our telecoms infrastructure. That one day Xi Jinping would wake up in a bad mood and our phones would stop working. Now, Trump can't turn off the phone network, but he can certainly send a kill signal to the phone operating systems of the two companies that make all the mobile phones in our pockets right now. And he can shut down any ministry any structurally important firm, any SME, even individual households, by taking away their administrative software. And of course, it's not just administrative software and mobile operating systems that are tethered to America's cloud. You remember in 2022, when Putin's thugs stole $6 million worth of tractors from Ukraine and took them to Chechnya. The John Deere company sent an over-the-air kill signal to those tractors and shut them down forever. They bricked them. And look, I am a cyberpunk writer, so I hear that and I think that is super cool. But I think about it for 10 seconds and I realize that this means that the John Deere company can send a kill switch to any tractor in the world. I mean, here we are in a country where every person gets a spot in a bunker, where every bridge and every tunnel has explosive charges in it to stop an invading army, but your tractors, your ventilators, your smart speakers, your phones, your government, your corporate IT systems, they can all be kill switched at the whim of the Mad King in DC. Anyone who cares about national security, which is everyone in these Hormuz-haunted, Greenland-stealing days, needs to get thinking about how to get their data off of American tech platforms and how to get the firmware out of our devices so that they're no longer tethered to either the Chinese or the American cloud. And none of that can be done so long as anti-circumvention law is on the books. Look, the US Trade Representative promised that we could have neutral technological platforms and unlimited free trade with America if we let American tech enshittify their products to their heart's content and steal our money and data. Now, Trump shattered those promises. When someone threatens to burn your house down unless you do as you're told, and you do it, and they burn your house down anyway, you don't have to keep doing what they tell you. In fact, you're a sucker if you do. Thank you.